A friend of mine once told me that he ate fast food nearly every day of the week. When I asked him why, he told me that he was really bad at cooking. When I asked a couple more directed questions, I figured out that he didn't know how to cook at all. That was a real eye-opener for me. I just blindly assumed that everyone knew how to cook. A year later, I got a new roommate who was halfway into his 20s, and this guy had no clue how to cook a healthy meal either. This made me think. Apparently there are a lot of people who don't know how to cook. Personally, I really like to cook when time allows it, and I would like to share my experience and passion with you guys. I hope you will enjoy. In this video, we will take a look at what is cooking, why do we cook, different type of foods of nutrients, how do we cook, what do we need to cook or which items do we need. We will do a thought experiment where we'll go through all the steps of how to make a simple meal based on an example, what are pitfalls when cooking or where does it usually go wrong, and we will end the video with some final thoughts. Let's dive right into it. So, what is cooking? When you look at definitions of cooking, you will find two that are most commonly used. First is to prepare food for consumption, and the second is to prepare food using heat. Personally, I agree more with the first one, to prepare food for consumption. There are many techniques used to prepare food, and requiring them to use heat would be a bit strange in my opinion. That would be like saying that music requires a guitar or that painting requires the use of a brush. In that sense, I think cooking is also a form of art. Art is defined as creating something that people enjoy or appreciate. Judging from the worldwide obesity numbers, I think it's safe to conclude that most people definitely enjoy food. And as mentioned, there are many ways to prepare food, just as there are many ways to make music or to create something visually appealing. In a world where you can get prepared food nearly everywhere, why do we still cook? Well, obviously not to look at the stuff that's on your plate, even though some food critics think this is very important. First, being able to cook well allows you to eat healthy food every day. If one of your core values is your health, which in my opinion it should be because you only have one life, then being able to create healthy food for yourself is very important. Second, knowing how to cook enables you to eat tasty food every day without being dependent on someone or something. Third, it becomes a lot easier to eat healthy and tasty at the same time if you know how to cook. Most people enjoy a fat, juicy burger and some fries, but to eat that every day is not a good idea. And if you disagree, I recommend you check out the documentary Super Size Me. If you know how to cook, you can make a super tasty meal out of very basic, healthy ingredients. Finally, it can also save you a lot of money. Pre-prepared food is usually way more expensive than raw materials. However, using raw materials requires you to prepare them, hence you will need to know how to do this. To summarize, if you combine these four principles, then you can make tasty and healthy food for less money. What is not to like? One might argue that it takes time, but getting fast food also takes time, and paying more requires you either to work more or to have less money. If you have a good argument why you shouldn't cook, feel free to post it below and we can discuss it. Now that we know what cooking is and why we would want to learn how to do it, let's take a look at ingredients. Please note, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a chemist or a medical doctor, and the following information has been simplified for educative purposes. There are two types of nutrients, macro and micronutrients. For this video we will skip the micronutrients as I think these do not fall under the basics of cooking, even though they also have a very important function. If you would like me to make a video about macronutrients, leave a comment and I'll see what I can do. So, macronutrients, what are they? Well, they are split into three categories: proteins, carbohydrates and fats. Each of these have a specific function and they do something different in your body. In nature, it rarely happens that a material is made 100% out of a single macronutrient. Most materials consist out of 2 or 3 of the macronutrients. However, a lot of ingredients consist mainly out of one of the 3. First up, proteins. Proteins are the building blocks of our body. They are the nutrients that our body uses to build itself. Muscle building, for example, is largely dependent on having enough protein in your diet. Some examples of protein-rich food are egg whites, meat, nuts, dairy products and fish. Next, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, or carbs for short, are our primary energy source. You can consider them the fuel that we need to do our daily activities. Some examples of carb-rich food are bread, pasta, oatmeal and sugar. Lastly, fats. Fats regulate and structure our basic metabolic functions. They play a vital role in maintaining a healthy skin and hair, and they protect our organs against shock, help maintain body temperature and promote healthy cell function. They are also essential for absorbing certain vitamins into our body. All in all three of them are very important. Unless you are on a necessary diet due to some disease or something similar like diabetes, it is recommended to have a healthy intake of all three each day. Here you see a table with nutrient facts per ingredient. This table can be found on foodnutritiontable.com. I definitely recommend taking a look at this table to find out what your food actually consists of. Here I've highlighted catfish. Catfish consists mainly of water, but it also has a lot of proteins and a little bit of fats. It doesn't contain any carbohydrates, so this is an ideal meal for someone who has diabetes and is not allowed to eat any sugar. Now that we know more about ingredients and why we cook, let's take a look at how to cook. Here you can see a list of cooking methods. These are the most commonly used methods for cooking something. For the purpose of this video, we will only take a look at two of them. The most used methods of cooking are boiling and pan frying. Most of the meals one can cook are made using one of these two methods. The boiling pan is used to boil ingredients by heating water to 100 degrees Celsius. The frying pan is used in conjunction with oil or butter to fry an ingredient. Overall, the boiling pan is used to prepare carbs such as rice and pasta, whereas the frying pan is used to bake meat and other vegetables. It is also possible to boil meat or vegetables. Cauliflower and broccoli, for example, are most commonly boiled, but they can also be fried. Multiple options are available depending on what you would like to make. So, what else do we need? Apart from the pans that I just mentioned, we need some type of heat source. Nearly every heat source uses either gas to make fire or electricity for induction. Moreover, we will need some tools. We will need a spatula for stirring, a large spoon, preferably made out of plastic or wood for putting the food onto your plate. A knife and a cutting board are necessary because most of the time you will need to cut your meat and vegetables. And finally, baking material for the frying pan, either oil or butter, as mentioned previously. And let me say this and stress this only once. Do not use metal tools in a frying pan. A frying pan has an anti-stick layer and you will damage it by using metal tools. I will personally come to your house and slap you if you do. So, now that we know which tools we need, let's do a thought experiment. We will go through every step that's required to make a meal. For this video we will use the example of a simple pasta. Pasta is easy to make and, depending on the ingredients, very healthy. After deciding which meal you would like to make, you need to consider which ingredients to use. For this example we will use minced meat, paprika, tomatoes, onion and spaghetti. Which pans you will use will depend largely on which type of meal you would like to make. For a simple pasta, 2 pans is enough, the boiling pan and 1 frying pan. Start by putting water in the boiling pan. The amount of water depends on how much pasta you would like to make. Generally, filling half the pan should be plenty. However, be careful to use enough. The pasta will absorb some of the water and the water will also evaporate due to boiling. However, don't use too much. If you fill the entire pan, the water will go over the edge and you will have boiling water flying everywhere. That's not very pleasant. As with most things in life, the golden middle is a good path to take, especially when you're unsure what to do. After you've filled the pan, be sure to put on the lid. This will save you time and thus money. Put the pan on a high fire so that the water will boil quickly. Let's move on to the frying pan. Put a spoon of oil in the pan and then place it on your heat source. Be sure not to heat the pan first, because if you heat the pan first and throw in the oil might jump out of the pan and that's a good way to get burn marks. After putting your frying pan on the fire, it's time to bake the minced meat. I usually cut it in the package before putting it into the pan, since the pieces will be nice and small. Now throw the meat in the pan. When the water is boiling, throw in the pasta. On the side of the box it usually says how long it should be boiled. It depends mostly on the type of pasta. I always buy a whole grain pasta because I think it's more tasty and it's also healthier. The longer you boil your pasta, the softer it becomes, up until you boil it to a porridge. Most of the time that's not very pleasant to eat, so I usually boil it al dente, which means that it's still firm but not hard. This gives you something to chew on. Next we have to think in which order to cut the vegetables. What should it depend on? Take a few seconds to think about it. It depends on the order in which you will want to use the vegetables in your recipe. It would not make any sense to start by cutting the ingredients that you will be using last. Personally, I really enjoy having my onions fried, so I will start by baking the onions first. Hence, it would make sense for me to start cutting the onions first as well. Now you can choose to cut either the tomatoes or the paprika. If you think that the paprika should be soft, then you should cut it first. If you want it to retain its structure and firmness, cut and just bake it last. Paprika gets very soft when baked, so again, up to personal preference. While cutting the vegetables, be sure to stir your meat every now and then. You have to make sure that every side of the meat is nice and brown. If you have trouble concentrating on multiple pans and ingredients at the same time, you can also start by cutting your vegetables first. However, this will cause your meal to take more time since you're doing things consecutively instead of simultaneously. After cutting a vegetable, you can throw it in with the meat. Mixing everything and baking it at the same time is not a problem as long as you make sure that the meat is ready. You can check this by its color and by checking inside the meat. If it's still red inside, it's not done. Luckily, minced meat is very thin compared to a big chunk of meat, so it's hard to go wrong here. Hence, I use it in this specific example. Moreover, cow meat can be eaten raw, depending on the quality of the meat. Still, I recommend baking it, since you never know what happened to the cow or to the meat. Chicken or pork, however, must always be cooked well. If you eat that raw, it can cause you to become very sick. When the pasta is done, you have to get rid of the additional water that is still inside the pan. Here I recommend cooking gloves, but if you don't have a pair, a towel also works fine. Just make sure you don't touch the pan with your skin, for obvious reasons. Throwing water out of a boiling pan can be done in two ways, the easy way and the difficult way. The easy way is to use a colander. This way you can just remove the lid and throw everything in the colander, assuming you put it in the sink first. Personally, I always go for the difficult method since I've already mastered it and I don't like to wash more dishes than absolutely necessary. Yes, laziness is also a factor while cooking. The difficult method is to create a crack between the lid and the pan itself. Then you hold it firmly and only dump the water into the sink. This way all the pasta stays inside of the pan and only the water goes out. This method takes some practice, but if you get good at it, it's not that difficult to do. And again, it saves you dirty dishes to wash. Washing a colander is really a pain in the ass. If everything is done, you can throw it all together in either of the pans, stir it and mix it, and it's ready to be served. I recommend to throw it in a boiling pan for 3 reasons. First, it has a lid, so you can put it in the fridge if you don't want to eat everything immediately, though make sure it's cooled off, you don't want to heat your fridge. Second, it's bigger, so it's easier to stir in it. Lastly, and I think this is the most important reason, it doesn't have an anti-sticking layer, so you can actually use metal tools in it. This was just a simple example that can be done with relatively little effort and equipment. However, it should function as a stable base to work from. What I mean with that is that you can swap out some ingredients for others and you will have a different meal. For example, you can add a sauce or make a sauce from the tomatoes by boiling them in an enclosed pan. You can also use a different meat like chicken. You can switch up the vegetables by removing the paprika and adding leek. You can also use a totally different carb like rice, which will also make the meal quite different. All in all, you have countless options to vary with. There are some common errors that you need to be wary of. I will list a couple here, including what doing so might result in. First, you can put the fire too high, especially when using the frying pan. This can result in black, uneatable food, or that your food is still cold and raw on the inside whilst the outside is already done. Second, you can bake or boil something too long. We already briefly touched upon this before, with the pork spaghetti, but your meat can also turn into rubber. I definitely don't recommend. Finally, baking too short. Also briefly mentioned this before, but it can be dangerous for multiple reasons. Also, some food is just plainly disgusting if it's raw, so make sure to prepare everything well. In conclusion, there are tons of possibilities when it comes to cooking, and most of it depends on your personal preference and imagination. Here are some things you can experiment with. You can use different pans. You can use grill pans or wok pans and they will give you different results, and they have different uses than the original frying pan. Also, you can prepare ingredients in multiple different ways. You can boil meat, for example, to make a soup. You can vary with ingredients. A small supermarket already sells more than 100 different types of food. You can use and vary in spices. We didn't touch upon this topic in this video because I think spices, perhaps other than salt and pepper, do not belong in the basics of cooking. However, using spices can bring a whole new dimension to your food, and is definitely recommended to experiment with spices as well. And of course, a combination of everything that I just mentioned. Variations are nearly endless, and finding out what you really like and making it can be super rewarding. Some people spend hours in the kitchen to create a masterpiece, whereas others prefer to get it over with and just make something quick and easy. It's up to you. However, one thing is unavoidable. You cannot skip out on the basics. Well, that was it for this video. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe if you would like to see future videos, and leave a comment on what you would like to see next. Baasje rolling out.